If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is John Rood. John is the founder of Proceptual, a compliance platform for artificial intelligence and machine learning. John is also an entrepreneur, having founded a successful test penetration business that was acquired before his work on Proceptual. John also gives back to the next generation of entrepreneurs as entrepreneur in residence at Michigan State University. John, welcome to the podcast, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your background, your career, why you love being an entrepreneur, and get us into that.
Yeah, sure thing. Love to tell that story. So I started my career here in Chicago. I did 3 years in management consulting at a little firm that did product development. And then I decided after that I had to be an entrepreneur. So I took some of the skills that I had in teaching and in test preparation. I started a little tutoring company. We were able to build that over the course of 8 years to be basically the number 2 test prep company in the pre-medical and pre-health market. We sold that to private equity. I worked there for a couple more years, and then started to look around at what was next. And I had this personal interest in AI, and I was studying AI and seeing how AI was getting big a couple of years ago. And we saw that there was going to be upcoming regulation in the AI space. And even this was back a couple of years ago. We knew that it was coming, and now that's in the nightly news now. But it was much more nascent then. We saw that was going to primarily start by impacting the HR space. So we started this company Proceptual in 2022, and what we do is we focus on helping HR leaders along with their legal counsel and their executive leadership get and stay compliant with these new laws that regulate the use of AI in the HR and hiring space.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. So, John, the use of all things AI is rapidly changing, as we all know. And you have a front row seat in this arena. So tell us how AI is evolving and how it's being used in the HR field today.
Sure thing. So in the last year, the popularity of AI has exploded. And AI has been around, depending on how you define it, for decades, right? I mean, it's machine processes, it's software. But in the last year, its popularity has exploded because there's this new wave of what's called generative AI, which is basically AI that makes things. So when we talk about, ChatGPT being the number one example, ChatGPT, you type in your input and it tells you, here's a recipe, here's a poem, here's a draft of an email, here's anything that you might want. And so it kind of touches the imagination of people a little bit more than it has in the past. And along with that, the interest in AI and HR has exploded as well. And there's a lot of tools now that are coming online from startups, and there's a lot of big companies in the ATS space and the pre-hire assessment space that are adding AI capabilities. So it's really a time where those capabilities are advancing very rapidly.
All right. So now that people are using AI much more frequently today, questions are coming up about ethics and fairness, and jurisdictions are passing regulations. Tell us a little bit about the laws that you're seeing being passed and what you anticipate coming in the future here.
So specifically in the HR space, we're seeing a number of laws that are being drafted all over the country. But the place where we always have to start when we talk about this, we start in New York. New York is often, as our HR listeners will know, the place where new kinds of regulation in the HR world get started. Then they go to California, then they go to Colorado, then they're everywhere. And the same thing happened with, pay transparency and non-compete, anti-non-compete laws and all that good stuff. So New York has passed this law. It's called Local Law 144. It's oftentimes just called the New York City AI Bias Law or AI Auditing Law. And it requires companies that use certain automated tools, whether AI powered or not, certain automated tools, that they get an audit of those tools basically for racial and gender bias, and that they post that audit publicly on their website. So there's a lot more detail that we can go into on that. But, one of the things that's happened in this space is because that was the first of its kind regulation, now other jurisdictions look to that. So, I think 2 years ago, we could have said there's a couple different ways that AI regulation could go in HR, but it seems like this sort of like bias audit type law that New York started with is now being copycatted. So we have the text, for example, of a law in New Jersey that just passed their legislative committee 8-0. It's likely to pass. That reads almost exactly like the New York law with very minor changes. So we'll likely see that kind of law rolling out nationwide in sort of like that New York, California, Colorado, New Jersey kind of state.
Yeah. So there's a high probability that this legislation process is going to happen pretty quickly and encompass the entire country within a couple of years, more than likely.
Yeah, it's quite likely. The California is always the big domino to fall in these kinds of regulations. Their law, which is like the New York law, but I think actually has more teeth and in some ways more restrictive, is likely to pass this year and probably goes into effect late in 2024, maybe the very start of 2025. But more than that, other than just seeing like, okay, is my company based in New York or California? Where is it based? The New York law is itself written to be quite expansive. So it applies to all companies that have an office in New York. So, even a company that's based in Illinois or California or Washington, if it's large enough to have New York offices, which of course most large and even medium-sized companies do, the law will apply to them as well. And it's something that they have to be thinking about today.
Yeah. So as these laws and regulations get passed and, ever growing, what risk does the use of HR in HR present itself? Can you talk a little bit more in depth about that?
Yeah, sure thing. There's a couple different risks, and let me talk about it from the lens of this law, but then we'll kind of show how the risk kind of spirals out from there. So the New York law has penalties, and every law has penalties. In New York, the penalty for noncompliance, depending on kind of how you read the law and how they choose to interpret it, can be up to about $3,000 per day. So, for a medium business, that's substantial. For a large business, like something to take care of, although maybe not urgent. But I think that there are two even larger issues that go beyond just kind of the wording of these state-by-state laws. One of them is what the federal government is going to do. So the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, came out and said that they have 3 regulatory priorities over the next 5 years. And one of them is this issue of algorithmic hiring or bias in algorithmic hiring. So the federal government's looking at this extremely closely and is making rules and is going to be doing enforcement in this space. The second risk, even apart from all these compliance questions, is a public relations question. The New York law requires that we post this audit for employers publicly. So people in the media, job applicants, folks in kind of like the civil society, like watchdog arena, are going to be looking at these, and it's going to be really bad for a company that uses these tools that are shown to have, as we would call it in kind of the legal world, disparate impact on protected populations.
Yeah. So as a company is considering the risk reward of using AI in this area, and in specifically HR, what factors should a company consider? And really, who should be at the table as they sort these things out?
That's a really good question. I think that as we sort this out, it's really important that the organization is thinking about this cross-functionally, because I think that it's really easy in the HR world to say, okay, we're going to go select a tool and put this tool into effect, without kind of thinking through all the implications. So I think that at minimum, HR has got to kind of bring in the compliance or the legal department, whether that be general counsel or whether that be outside counsel, and look at these tools. And of course, HR departments are used to doing this. I mean, everyone's got their employment lawyer to go to for these kinds of questions. But it's important to kind of make this a little bit broader. I think it's also important to talk about these issues really openly with your vendors, right? So vendors in this space are as a general rule, very attuned to these issues. And a lot of the startups in this space that are starting the last couple of years have really started to focus in on these issues of bias and fairness. So, most of the tools are trying to do the right thing. And therefore, like, let's talk to them together, right? So have this partnership where, we're not just getting a tool and consuming it, but we're saying, hey, we've got these compliance risks, we've got this PR risks. You as the vendor have to help us as the employer manage those things.
Yeah. So let's get to the point where HR makes a decision they want to use AI-related tools for whatever reasons. How can they implement an AI safety program and do so ethically in their business? What steps would you recommend for them to take here?
Well, there's a couple different things that they should be thinking about. And the first is we have to understand how the tool itself has been vetted for bias and for disparate impact. So if we're following, for example, this New York law, which again will probably be a model nationwide, it requires that employers who are using a new tool get an audit of that tool even before they start using it. And they do that in partnership with the vendor. So the vendor has data from other employers. There are certain provisions in the law that employers can use test data in order to kind of test the tool and make sure that it's not producing biased results. So you want to be able to think through those things. And I think that before HR uses an AI-driven tool, you've got to understand and have something written down that says, here's how we thought about this issue, right? So here are our considerations. We want to make sure that the tool is bias-free. We want to make sure that the tool has been audited by a third party. Then we feel good putting it into effect.
Yeah. So for a company that makes this decision, is there a certain type of infrastructure they need in the organization to make sure the program operates safely and effectively?
Well, I think that there's a couple different ways that you can handle that. And certainly large employers, like very large organizations, will have, a variously called an AI ethics board or an AI governance board. I've seen some organizations that are hiring people full-time to be, the vice president of AI policy or something like that. So you can certainly bring someone on to do that. I think for the smaller and mid-sized organizations, one helpful way to think about it is really to see what these laws are saying, right? Because compliance is obviously a really important consideration. But that compliance that someone like New York or like California gives us kind of lets a smaller employer see, okay, here are the guardrails, right? The regulators have thought through, here's how we have to put these new tools into effect. So I think that's a really helpful place to start.
Yeah. So as we sit here today and you see regulations starting to evolve around the country, and you've already highlighted how New York is going to be going probably to New Jersey, California, Colorado. What do you think? How do you think the rest of the regulations or laws might evolve in this space?
I think that it's possible for the laws to go a couple different ways. So I think that, we've already said, I think that this bias auditing stream of legal thought is probably going to continue. But there's a couple of other ways that regulators can think about these issues. One of them is through the lens of privacy or data security. And so, for example, Colorado has a new consumer data protection law that has certain requirements for the ways that companies handle consumer data. There's transparency requirements. There's a necessity for companies to let consumers opt out or to erase their data. So I think that you could see that strand as well. And I think that we saw GDPR a couple of years ago, which is the European privacy regulation. That seemed to happen quite quickly, where companies globally, not just in Europe, started to get the, here's our cookie policy. Do you accept? So I think that you'll probably see that privacy lens as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about Proceptual. Tell me where you're at today. Tell me how you're collaborating with clients and the value proposition you guys are bringing into the market. Sure thing.
So, I came at this business through the lens of being really interested in AI and interested in the way that this technology is evolving. But I've also run businesses before, right? So I've run HR and I've run organizations from, 0 to 400 people, and I've seen those challenges. So I know what it's like to hear about a new law that passes. You don't really know much about it. Maybe you heard about the new law from, SHRM or whoever else. And now you have to deal with it, right? And so an HR organization is probably dealing with 10 to 20 new regulations of something in HR on a yearly basis. So as we think about, specifically in AI, this new regulation hits, companies don't know what to do. It's brand new to the world, and they need help. No, number one, understanding the law, which certainly their law firm, their general counsel is going to help with that as well. And they need a solution to get compliant quickly, reliably, and that's exactly what we do. So we're here to help companies understand what these new laws require of them, to help them do those steps as quickly and as cost effectively as is possible to do.
Yeah. So with Proceptual, is it a virtual support, or is it on-site gathering of information, collaboration face to face, or giving since the country is really just coming out of a pandemic relatively recently, can you do this virtually?
Everything that we do is virtual. Our clients oftentimes are distributed themselves, and so what we're doing fundamentally when we work through this compliance process is we are requesting a bunch of data, which then we're taking back and analyzing with our own software, and we're doing a couple of management interviews to make sure that we understand, how is HR using this tool, who in the organization is using it, walking through the process of how does this work for the applicant, like what does the applicant see as they move through this process? So it can all be done virtually.
Yeah. And then when it comes to very specific AI type tools, is that something that your team is capable of recommending to HR programs? Or are you only dealing with regulations?
We're really only dealing with regulations. The one exception to that, and I've been really pleased to have this development in our business, is we started going on podcasts just like this, and we spoke at the National SHRM conference and got some news placements, and companies started to come to us and ask for training. And the training wasn't necessarily in this compliance world. It was help us understand AI, right? Help us understand what these tools are. 65% of the population has not used these modern AI tools, which is reasonable. Like they're basically brand new. So companies just want help understanding what is the future. So we're going to do in 2 weeks. We'll go do a training for a major international logistics provider on their on AI tools. And so that's kind of what we do. That's supplementary, but no, we don't recommend certain tools. As the external auditors for our client companies, we have to have a little bit of an arm's length distance from the vendors themselves.
Yeah. Can you summarize for us the areas that AI exists today in the area of HR? And are there any categories that you could say AI fits in these buckets?
Yeah, here's the 3 big categories where we see AI tools. The first is applicant tracking and kind of resume screening together. So every HR department, more than just a couple of people, has an applicant tracking system. So they use ADP or Jazz or Greenhouse or one over another, like probably 20 other choices. Within those applicant tracking systems, most of them now have some kind of automated scoring or ranking system. So if you post a job as an HR leader and you get, this would be a blessing, you get 100 applications and then the system says, here's the 20 that we think are best matches for the skills and experience you've identified. That process of picking out the top 20, that is driven algorithmically, right? So that's one of those things where whether you call that AI or not, like that's the sort of thing that we're talking about here today. The second big bucket is pre-hire assessment. So, going back to the dark ages where you'd have an applicant take a test on paper and pencil for their Excel skills or whatever it might be. The modern tools are automating that. And oftentimes the modern tools aren't simply, here's a test of your Excel skills or here's a test of your Python coding or whatever. It's like, here's 5 balloons, pick out the order that you should inflate the balloons, and then we're going to purport to understand something about, your psychology or your work style from this. And to the extent that companies are then using that to make hiring decisions, that's exactly kind of the use of AI that we're talking about today. And then I would say the third category that comes up is interview tech tools. So if you've seen these kinds of tools where applicants are asked to give kind of like a one-sided video interview that's recorded, and it's not a two-way conversation. Oftentimes, there are modern tools that will purport to do some kind of analysis on those interviews, and that's been one of the areas which has been like highly problematic because oftentimes, if you're analyzing someone's face, the different races, the different genders aren't judged the same way. So that's kind of that's technology that seemed to be bigger a couple of years ago, but it's been highly problematic. I don't see as much of that anymore.
Yeah. Well, John, I could sit here and talk with you all day about this topic because I do believe it's an area that is going to, just totally encompass HR as we move forward. So I'm going to look forward to catching back up with you and see how things are going in this space. But before we sign off, I have a question that I ask every guest, and I'd like to ask you today. If S2 Verify were to conduct a background screening on you, would there be any surprises?
I don't think that you'd find anything that's too surprising. I've got 2 speeding tickets, one in high school, and then one about 5 years ago when my wife told me I was driving too slowly. So she made me speed up, and then I got
It's her fault.
I got a speeding ticket, but I think that'd be about it. It's her, yeah, exactly.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for joining. Would you mind sharing with our audience where people can keep up with you and what's going on with Proceptual?
Absolutely. So feel free to connect with us or with me personally on LinkedIn. And our website is proceptual.com. I'm sure the spelling will be down there in the notes, but we've got blogs, we've got a newsletter. So if you're in HR, come sign up for our newsletter. You'll get these updates on what's going on in the compliance AI world on a monthly basis.
Well, that's fabulous. Thanks again so much. And now I'd like to have a minute with my partners, Bill and Jim at S2 Verify. This industry that we're in, and for our listening audience, we'll give a little framework about the industry, which, I believe it's currently about 1,200 providers, give or take, in our industry. So it's highly fragmented. I've seen reporting that it's about a $4 billion industry. Bill, where do you see S2 Verify growing in this space and over the next 10 years? What's your thoughts? You're at the tip of the spear for guiding our corporation and leading us forward. What do you think? Where do you think things are headed?
I think we'll be in the 50 million range within 10 years. I think we'll be in the top between 5 and 7 background, companies out there as they continue to make acquisitions. So I think we'll be in the, in the top 5% of the background check companies. I think we'll be providing services for a long time. I think we have the right product and right, mindset. So that's where I think we'll be in 10 years.
Great. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I can't really pile on that one with Billy. That is exactly, we operate sometimes on the same wavelength. But I think I would like to believe that we will land in the top 10 for sure. Okay. And I would tell you that because we're doing things, the driver of all of that's going to be your willingness, your diligence, and then your investment bandwidth to keep pouring money at compliance and a background check being done the right way. And we have been doing that since day one, the 3 of us. And so over the next probably, let's make it in this framework, 3 years to 5 years, the intensity of compliance is going to drive up, and you're going to find a lot of companies going, we can't do it. We're not going to do it. We're not going to invest in what it takes, which will obviously changes the dynamic of who that top end is. And I firmly believe we will land ourselves in that top 10.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we talk about HR leaders who are designing world-class teams with Lauren Winans. She's the CEO and founder of Next Level Benefits. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. John, thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Arnette, yep, same thing here. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Thanks, Gene.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.